Okay, cool. Well, thank you again for coming on. I know this seems to always happen on a Sunday, so it's a Sunday again, and we're back. Um, so I'll give everyone a little bit of context as to who you are. So this is Max Radvan, everyone. He's one of my peers at university, and again, a really environmentally connected and very passionate person. And I feel like you kind of are one of those people that really appreciates someone else's goal. So thank you again for coming on. As I understand it, you've written a song based on quite a well-known story in the ecology community. It follows the extinction of a wren species on a particular island that was primarily driven by a singular cat, more specifically the lighthouse keeper's cat. Can you go into a little bit more detail about the story and I guess what inspired you to write a song about it?
Yeah. Well, in terms of the story, I actually first came across it in a Bill Bryson book, that very, very well-known Bill Bryson book, Short History of Nearly Everything, where he described it, that particular story. He was talking about animal extinctions in kind of the 19th and 20th century when the world started to become more kind of connected, but people weren't really aware of vulnerable kind of species. And yeah, I always wanted to start writing about, because I am a musician, but I haven't gone into a lot of songwriting exploring. So always wanted to do some more creative things with the work we do at uni, so conservation based. And I guess, I don't know why this one in particular, sort of the imagery and just the general vibe, I guess, really kind of captured my imagination. And yeah, I was kind of hit with that inspiration, which is always nice when it happens. Because actually, yeah, then I heard it again in a class in uni around like earlier this year, and I kind of ruminated on it, and yeah, came up with it. I think what I liked about it was it a very tragic but very simple story. It's
Yeah.
only got, a couple of characters in it. There's the lighthouse keeper and his cat, and they kind of presumably live alone on this island. And I just started to it was interesting to think about things from different perspectives as well. So I was just struck by the fact that, if you're living alone like that with that job, which is probably pretty simple, you might see people come and go to, you might have people come to deliver supplies and stuff. I don't know what it's like to be a lighthouse keeper that much, but I imagine it's a very lonely kind of existence. And I just imagine that cat was very dear to him. And if he'd been told that, that cat was, um, not good for the island, driving, species to extinction, whether he would have actually gone, that's not good, or whether he would have gone, well, it's kind of one of the things in my life that makes me the most happy. It's a very hard thing to think about, sacrificing that for a bird that hadn't even been discovered really yet. Yeah.
Are you aware of what species it actually was?
Yeah, it was let me have a quick look. It was off an island in New Zealand, and it was called, I had it somewhere. See, the thing about it is, just while I look for it, is that I took a lot of kind of creative sort of, it wasn't very close to the fact. Like, I have no idea whether he was lonely or everything, but I kind of, it
That's
wasn't.
the beauty of it. You can sort of make those inferences and make those
Yeah,
connections in order to make something like a beautiful piece.
yeah, exactly. And I think anything that's based on real stories, any artworks that's based on true stories does take some kind of artistic freedom in it. It was the Stevens Island wren, Traversia lyalli in New Zealand. In both Bill Bryson and in the particular lecture where it was brought up last semester, I'm fairly certain it happened more than once on a couple of islands, which I tried to do more research into, but I couldn't find any actual evidence of that. But I think one of our lecturers mentioned that it happened more than once, and so does Bill Bryson.
So, if you don't mind, I thought it would be a good idea to include the song in the video.
Yeah.
So people could listen to it. I genuinely think it's an amazing song. I sat there.
Thanks. Yeah.
I sat there with my mouth open basically the whole time. Yeah, it's a really beautiful song. It's really well written. I think.
Yeah, it's definitely more of that storytelling, and this is the theme that I want to come back to again and again in terms of conservation. It's not so much that art is the important thing, it's storytelling, and that's can be done through art, but it can be done through literature, it can be done through just talking, telling stories, and that's a theme that I'm going to return to again and again. So yeah, very much this isn't like a like a love song or whatever. It's a song that tells a story.
Yeah. And I think those kind of things are becoming increasingly important. I think that's how we utilize that form of communication, I think, more so now than ever.
I eat breakfast at twilight and my dinner at dawn. I shine brighter than starlight, keeping sailors from dashing their ships on the shore. Nothing more. I live all on my own. It's just me and the cat. Had a sweetheart back home. We'd write letters of love, but it's been a long time since I got a reply back. 7 years and 20 days I've been keeping track, as to why though I can't answer that. At least I've got my cat, my little carnivore. She brought the strangest gift, a brightly colored corpse, and laid it at my feet. This sweet creature of empathy, she saw something beautiful and wanted to capture it just for me, to ease my melancholy. We'll watch the ship sail across the blue and boundless sea, just you and me. She brings more It's an endless supply. Feathers litter the bay. Seems the colors to flow from these vessels to wash away all of my gray skies, and wash away these tears I've cried. Serves them right. Don't they know that they can fly? But they don't try, so why can't I, my little carnivore? She brought the strangest gift, a brightly colored corpse, and laid it at my feet. This sweet creature of empathy, she saw something beautiful and wanted to capture it just for me, to ease my melancholy. And we'll watch the ships sail across the blue and boundless sea, just you and me. That was 3 years ago. Lost my best friend in the fall. On the hill lies her tombstone. She'd bring offerings of love, but it's been a long time since I heard the birds singing at all. Guess she finally caught them all. So I'll watch the ships sail by this lonely seashore forevermore.
In terms of cat curfews, so for people who don't know, there's cat curfews in particular areas, even places like Bayside. I think it's 9 p.m. or something your cat has to be indoors by. Dandenongs obviously have a more prominent cat curfew that I think more people know about. What would you say to people who refuse to abide by those cat curfews where they are in place?
Yeah, it's very difficult. My first thought is, and I heard this talked about on a radio show when it first came into sort of practice, this idea of curfews, is I'm yet to meet an obedient cat that will actually come back at a certain time. But I guess that's down to the owner. It's always down to the owner. That's their responsibility. But the other thing is, like, it's only nighttime, so you're not, maybe your cat's more active at nighttime, but you're not taking much away from the cat's life by, equality of life by just bringing it in at night. It's probably better for it anyway, because, you know, that's when a lot of I think accidents happen on roads as well. So
Yeah.
it's probably better. And I just think I get the idea that you've got this creature that you want it to be free and have a good life, but
Hmm.
at the same time, you got to be aware of,
The consequences.
yeah, and just
Yeah.
your situation. Like cats don't really belong here. At the end of the day, they just don't, which is it's a hard thing for people to get their heads around because
Yeah.
people love their cats, but
Yeah.
yeah, it's really tricky. And with pets in general, like it's come up for me a lot because I have a dog and
Hmm.
wondering, you know, the question of where to let her off lead and where to, and obviously she loves being off lead, but where do you do that? Because, you know, she's, you know, very she definitely has, as much as you wouldn't want that in your dog, she definitely has that hunter's instinct. So if
Yeah.
she sees like possums or something, she'll just be so obsessed. And in fact, just like 2 days ago in my area, I live like in the inner northern suburbs of Melbourne, by the Merri Creek. Just in the suburb above me, I saw a story posted in one of the local groups on Facebook that reminding people to keep their dogs on leads around the area because two dogs had injured a swamp wallaby,
Oh, wow.
which later died
No.
at the animal hospital, which is a good reminder that there are certain areas where you can and cannot let your dogs, you know, just wander around.
Yeah.
But again, it's tricky because you want your dog to have a great time when it's
Hmm.
out and it's
And
walking.
ultimately, like, yeah, you've put your dog in this situation. I'm the same. I have a cat. We actually put her on a leash outside because first of all, her breed is just very, she's, I don't want to use the word stupid.
Yeah.
But she's definitely got no road sense whatsoever.
Okay.
And,
Yeah.
you know, she's been missing once for a few weeks. And from then on, we basically just put her on a leash. And I remember I used to get really upset putting her on a leash because ultimately she is an animal. And
Yeah.
I guess I sort of gained a little bit more insight and perspective as to, you know, as to why she should be on a leash for
Yeah.
her own safety and for, I guess, the well-being of other animals. Not that she's
Yeah.
the kind of, I don't really think she's the kind of cat that has the instinct to kill a rat or kill a mouse or something like that.
Yeah. And
I
at
know
the end of
cats
the
that
day,
do
killing rats
that.
and mice is such a bad thing.
Yeah, but
When it's
they
birds, at
they
least.
don't know how to distinguish between like an antechinus and
Yeah.
a rat.
At the end of the day, they're domesticated animals, so they're not that. I mean, cats less so than dogs because cats, you know, it's believed that they domesticated themselves, and they'd probably a lot of cats would do okay without humans. But at the
Yeah.
end of the day, like it is almost like they are our responsibility because we breed them and we breed them for ourselves, and yeah, we've got to take responsibility for that.
Yeah, bit of a moral dilemma, unfortunately.
Yeah.
What do you reckon is probably the most controversial pest species versus public perception incident, I guess? Or
Um, I guess it would probably be either cats or some species of fish. Um, Cats is a big one because people love cats.
Yeah.
Like we know that people love cats, and the thought of people going around and killing cats to some people is just horrific, like
Yeah.
absolutely horrific. Even
Mhm.
though these aren't really the kind of cats that are like the cats you're used to seeing. These are the big feral ones,
Yeah.
probably being the ones that are the problems.
Yeah.
Very controversial because of people's close association with these animals.
Mhm.
Which, yeah, I think even in Australia, people don't have that relationship, personal kind of feeling about things like foxes and even camels and kangaroos and stuff. People are like, well, when it comes to cats, it's different. But
Mhm.
then some species of fish as well, I would suggest. I was just talking to my housemate last night who is works for local council in the Yarra Ranges. She's done a lot of work in freshwater ecosystems, and
Yeah.
we were talking about not that they're not actually. Well, they are. you would class them as pests, but because, you know, they're such good fish, these are things like trout, rainbow trout, brown trout, all these introduced fish that literally still get put there. A lot of them do prey on native species of fish, but they keep getting put there because they're such good. I guess people like to fish those ones, and they taste good apparently. Those particular ones, and I think that would be controversial because you couldn't remove them. And my housemate was saying that I think the Victorian government's got a goal of having, I think she said like 1 million people visiting fishing spots per year in Victoria, which is
That's kind of worrying.
And it's those fish that draw people to those places, and it's good for tourism in those regions, and it's good for, well, yeah, just tourism, I guess. But that's another one I would suggest.
Yeah. What about, you mentioned, people's connection with cats and that emotional attachment. Do you think it's a similar thing with horses?
With horses, yes. Probably.
Feral horses in the Alpine region specifically.
I imagine, yeah. I haven't actually read too much about that. I know that's a very current issue, but yeah, I do imagine that's the same case. I have it particularly with horses because I have it when it comes to things like the Melbourne Cup and racing, which I absolutely abhor. I hate that stuff. I think it's awful. And the thought of these horses being, but that's different, I guess. They're being tortured and then murdered. But yeah, so I would admit that I probably have that. Not saying that they belong there either, but
yeah. But I guess, as Ido mentioned last video, being an ecologist or, you know, doing environmental science is killing things sometimes, unfortunately. It's not nice. People don't like to do it. That's what people don't understand as well. A lot of environmental scientists sort of get this backlash from eradicating pests, well, attempting to eradicate pest species, but, you know, people don't like doing it.
Yeah, of course, it is one of those things as well that it's like this chicken or egg thing, because it's like, well, it's not the animal's fault that they're, you know, having these adverse effects on the community. It's humans' fault for introducing them there, and then them becoming kind of abundant and, you know, adapting to that environment. And then it's our fault, and yet they still are the ones that have to die. And what a mess.
Yeah. So more broadly, what can people do to have a positive impact on the interactions between domesticated animals such as pets, and wild and perhaps vulnerable species?
Well, they definitely need separate spaces where they can be free. Because for me, a space where my dog can run around is the most important thing for her. Like, so important, because she's a dog that can run and play for hours and hours, and she needs that. Otherwise she goes a bit feral herself. And it you know, brings you joy to see the dog that you love running around and having fun. You need that. But it can't, not at the expense of any native species that might, or any native species, not even just threatened ones. I think, you know, there's no reason that any animal should be hunted by a predator that, you know, they're not used to. And die. With cats, I don't know much about domestic cats, like what they need. I've lived with a cat before, but it was very much an indoor cat. Which a lot of cats are. But those outdoor ones,
they can be ruthless.
They can be, yeah. It's so odd though, because even then, like, you see cats just when you're walking around the neighborhood and they're out on the pavement and just sitting there, and, you know, they're nice creatures. They come and say hello, and but there are also like lots of stories as well in the local area of they always get run over. So it's like, as a cat owner, I feel like you'd want to keep an eye on your cat, not just let it roam free, not only for the safety of, you know, other animals in the area, but for the cat's own safety. Like, yeah, it's a bit of a funny one. I guess urban might be, I guess it's different depending on location. It's almost case by case, because, in urban environments. Perhaps the cats don't have that much of an impact on, you know, the species that are around, because, you know, the species that are around are probably not at risk in the same way as, you know, a cat living on a farm would be. Yeah.
I find that there is definitely a there are regional differences in terms of cats being pest species or dangerous to native wildlife. I don't think there's any of that kind of awareness down where I live. Maybe like a little bit, but that's people who are quite apt in this field. Whereas you go to the Dandenongs and there's a completely sort of different mindset about it, and people are quite aware of it. And I think from what I've heard, a lot of people are happy to comply.
Yeah.
I didn't even know there was a cat curfew down where I live until a few weeks ago.
Yeah, I didn't. I heard
Worrying
about it
because
years and years ago. Yeah.
yeah, it's a bit worrying because, you know, as someone that is studying environmental science, you kind of think that I'd know that before 3 weeks ago. So moving on to sort of like a different part of this discussion, is it so? It is clear that the arts industry, and I use arts industry quite broadly, as you mentioned earlier. We can sort of, these ideas can sort of stem into literature and writing and visual art and stuff like that. So I use it quite broadly. The arts industry is moving slowly away from more traditional ideas and into more, I guess, niche-y, abstract pieces. Where do you think environmental science fits into these industries?
Well, I think that it's not as crazy as you might think. I think it comes back to this idea of storytelling, and I think I've just started reading this book, actually. It's a brilliant book. It's called Braiding Sweetgrass. It's by a woman called Robin Wall Kimmerer. I'm just looking at her name there. And she's American, but she's got ancestry to like native Indian tribes there. And she's also works at a university. She's an environmental scientist. She's a botanist, I think. And she talks about, and she writes so beautifully as well. She's also a poet, and she's talking about the storytelling nature of those Indian tribes and how that shapes and molds their relationship with the natural world, and how it's this kind of real give and take. And she draws these parallels between things like, you know, mass fruiting events and, you know, unity. And, you know, she tells the story of like their kind of origin story, where a woman falls from a hole in the sky onto the world, and there's no land at that point. It's just water. And all these animals, you know, they go, oh, this woman needs some land. So they find some mud for her and they put it on a turtle's back, and that becomes the land. And she in turn has brought all these plants that she grows on the land, and all the animals come onto the land, and they kind of have this kind of give and take relationship with each other. And that kind of shapes, you know, the whole mindset of these people. And it's the same with pretty much a lot of Indigenous origin stories you hear. I'm sure, you know, the Aboriginals are the same. They've got this connection to the land that is not the one we have, which is, you know, Robin draws the parallel between that story and the story of Adam and Eve, and how, you know, their Garden of Eden was, you know, one of this give and take relationship, whereas that Eve was, you know, kicked out of that place and, you know, put onto this world and told, you know, use animals and stuff as you want, roughly. I imagine there's more to it than that. But it is those stories that shape our values and our relationship with the natural world. And so there's lots of examples of that kind of stuff out there. There's that book I was telling you about. There's I saw recently a play it was a one guy he did this kind of piece on a story of an American who got lost, and ended up being found by a tribe in the Amazon, and his story of watching them and how they live and how they deal with the incoming threat of colonists, and how they were doing all these rituals to kind of try and escape the degradation of their people and their forest, which was very powerful. And those things are very powerful. And he constantly brought it back to the concept of, these people grow up with these values and perhaps we don't. And it's in the stories we tell. And I think that's really important. Really important, and something I'd love to be able to explore more and more and more.
And it's those kind of stories that should have shaped the minds of young people as well, which is probably what is most necessary given the current situation.
Yeah. And it's one of those things, like, since first year of, and a degree in environmental science and conservation, it's stressed to us the importance of, addressing the human dimensions of any conservation issue. It's conservation will not work unless you work with the people that, stakeholders and the people that it affects. And it's about, a lot of it's got to do with changing human behavior, which is very difficult, as one of our lecturers just spoke about recently. But I think storytelling through various mediums like, literature or music or performance is a very effective way of at least questioning behavior, making people think about behavior, and possibly from there change that behavior. Yeah.
It almost seems like a more tactful way to do it.
Yeah, definitely, because people don't like being told what to do or that their ideas are wrong. But if people are kind of, going, put on this journey of kind of where it feels like their point of view is being addressed and explored in a kind of very tactful and interesting and engaging way, but then another side of the story is also being told in that same way, that's when people start to go, oh, I can see that issue from the other perspective as well, and I can understand it a lot better, because you can talk to people as much as you want, and some will listen, but some might not. Just talking, I think.
100%. In terms of impacts on the environment through the arts industry, in what ways have you recognized the direct impact that the arts industry has on the environment, and how do you think it can be improved? That's a very broad question, I know.
Yeah, I can't think of any specific examples off the top of my head, aside from going back in history when it was this oral tradition, this storytelling that in these kind of communities, I'm sure Aboriginal communities, Indigenous people, probably all over the world, places that I haven't even heard of, where these kinds of stories and these kind of traditions and I'm sure their own expression of themselves through art was what shaped that really healthy relationship with the land, where it was where they cared for it as much as it cared for them. And
and perhaps we don't need to, just putting some thoughts out there, perhaps we don't need to sort of make up our own stories, but understand these stories from the traditional owners, if that makes sense.
I really believe that. I really believe that, because they knew what they were talking about, and it's again and again, it's always, some book comes out or some paper comes out where it says, oh, this thing we've just discovered, this thing that Indigenous people have always known. Like, even an example in the first few pages of this book I've read, you know, these indigenous people talk about trees talking to each other, right? And and she was saying, well, from a Western perspective, trees can't talk to each other because they don't have the necessary organs and means. But of course, it then comes out that they can send pheromones to each other and communicate and say, hey, I'm being predated upon. You should probably, you know, make some proteins that are, or some kind of chemicals that's going to deter predators. And they do talk to each other, or even through these mycorrhizal fungus networks in the soil, they can talk to each other and make sure that if, you know, one particular tree has an abundance of energy, then some of that might be sent to a tree that's, you know, lacking that. And it's yeah, so it these indigenous people, it's not, they knew things that we're only discovering through science now, and continue to do so. I think we will constantly find them to be right, because they lived with the land, they watched it, they observed it for far, far longer than any Western person has.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, well, some really encouraging stuff, Max. I really appreciate you coming on and chatting. I'm sure a lot of people will find this quite engaging and interesting. I think it's a perspective that we don't really explore enough in environmental science. But yeah, thank you again so much for coming on. Hopefully we can chat soon.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Alex.